Call to order, Town of Prescott Valley Study Session Meeting, April 6, 2023. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Leyva is not with us today. Councilmember Greer. Here. Councilmember Dickinson.
Here.
Councilmember Hepperly.
Here.
Member Schumacher.
Present.
Vice Mayor Hunt.
Here.
Mayor Palguda.
Present.
And Lucy Leyva is here. We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Davidson, the floor is yours.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this afternoon's study session is a third in a series of water-focused sessions that we've had with you and our broader public. If you recall, January 5th, which seems like a long time ago, we kicked this off where we, at a 40,000-foot view, talking about Prescott Valley's overall water management strategy. And I'll have a slide to just kind of remind us of the discussion that we had at that particular session. But again, that was at a very high level to kind of talk about where we are with our water resources and kind of the overall strategy of the many moving parts and pieces of an overall management plan that needed to be put into place. We came back to you on February 2nd. And at that study session, we specifically drilled down to water projects and initiatives. We highlighted some projects over the next few years that will help complement recharge efforts and other opportunities to make sure that we're managing every drop of water within our community. And today's session, we are going down to a much more granular level. And we'll be talking about goals that will eventually be translated into specific policies. And so all of the items that we're going to be talking about today, again, they are goals. You're not approving anything tonight. And some of them, I suspect, are going to need more in-depth discussion because some of them get pretty complicated. But I want you to think of all of the things that we're going to be talking about as levers that you can either move up or down. When you move something up and it causes a reaction by others. And if you move it down, it lessens the reaction. So all of these are designed to make our community and all of us move in certain directions. So kind of think of it like that. All of these, though, will have to eventually be translated back into a resolution or an ordinance. So just the mere fact of us putting these concepts on paper and discussing it doesn't make it an official town policy. We'll have to bring it back as actual ordinances or resolutions. So you're probably familiar with this. This was part of that first study session. And I just want to highlight very quickly the importance of this three-part component of principles. First and foremost, this is about protecting our aquifer. Without water, we don't have a community. Without a long-term water management strategies, we're not going to have a viable community. So the council clearly has, with our strategic plan that you all adopted, the most recent general plan that you were part of, and then the community ultimately adopted, it really hits at the importance of managing our water resources. The second piece, and it goes hand in hand, is we have to have an economy. So there's a lot of people that talk about we shouldn't have any growth, we shouldn't allow any new people to move into the community, and that's just not feasible. If we do not have growth, whether it's business growth or people coming in and visiting our community, we would be in decline. And if you're in decline, you won't have the money to fix the aquifer and to make sure that we have a good quality of life. So it's really important that all of us, as part of our strategies, and then the broader public understands, we have to make sure that we've got a viable economy for our future. This is then what we had presented on that January study session. This is kind of the four parts of our overall management plan. Obviously you can't really drill down into each one of these items, but we talked about some of the plans and studies and strategies that we are currently engaged in, the partnerships, the extreme importance of partnerships in the region and across the state, the projects that we had talked about at the February study session, and then today we're talking about the policies. I'm not going to go through all these, but these are the items that we're going to be covering today, and this was from that original list, and we've then translated them into actual discussion items for today's session. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Legler, and he's going to kick us off. And what you're going to see with our team here today, or actually not Mr. Legler, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hunter. We have a key part of our team who's been working with us over this past year, Hunter Moore, who has been assisting us with and facilitating some really in-depth water discussions and really helping us to zero in on, what's real, what's not real, and what's feasible, what's not feasible, and really kind of going through and testing all of our assumptions of water and water knowledge. So Hunter's going to talk briefly, and then each one of us will be taking some of these different policies. So you see us popping up to kind of explain some of the different policy elements. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Moore.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Poguta, Vice Mayor Hunt, and members of the council. My name is Hunter Moore. I'm a consultant for the town of Prescott Valley, and I've been working with Mr. Davidson and your team in the water area for about almost a year now. I use my network, my knowledge and experience to serve the team and your community on the issue of water. I have 18 years of experience working with municipal, county, state, and federal governments on both water and non-water issues. For 5 years, I served as Governor Ducey's advisor on natural resources, working on water, energy, public land, primarily forest issues, and other things that were part of the natural resource space. I'm a former attorney. I worked in the National Football League for several years for the Minnesota Vikings and the Kansas City Chiefs. Ironically, football is great training for water and the subjects that you really get into. You have to prepare, you have to work very hard, and you have to be very tough and make a lot of hard decisions when it comes to water issues. In my time working for you and your team, I've helped facilitate meetings with the Department of Water Resources, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, Salt River Project, and a few state legislators. I've informed your team and talked with them extensively about current events, things that are happening down at the legislature related to budgets, legislation, the change in the administration from the Ducey administration to the Hobbs administration, changes in policy and approaches with staff and decision-making there. And I've participated in weekly huddles with your team to go over not only the subject matter, but make sure that from an operational standpoint, we continue to communicate and make progress on all of the issues and policies that you're going to be briefed on today. We've held and I've helped facilitate 8 different staff workshops over the last year or so, really trying to dig in, as Mr. Davidson talked about, not only the policy, but how operationally we look at things. What are the facts? What are the details related to the dollars that we spend, the water that we have access to, the rights that we have, and really stress testing and making sure that as we put ideas down on paper, we're thinking through the details of that and making sure that the result is quality for you as you consider the things that we present. The overall arching theme of all of this work, and Mr. Davidson had alluded to it, is that water is one of the most vital resources in our community and a key factor in the health and strength of the economy. As a member of this state, and someone who loves this state and has served in the public sector, I'm very grateful that the council is making water a council level issue. It's very prudent to do so. And I hope that as you hear the information that's presented to you today, you give us feedback and thoughts so that we can digest the will of the council and understand things that we need to go back and work harder on. Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity to serve in this community. I'm from the eastern part of the state, but I love this part of Arizona, and I'm very glad to be able to work here and be here with you. happy to answer any questions, but I think you're very much going to enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, sir. Council, wave anything, gentlemen, before we move on?
Thank you.
Mr. Legler, welcome.
Thank you. I didn't know you were going to have two attorneys to have to get through today. I'm sorry that you had to do that. My job is to go through the first two of the three slides that deal with accomplishing a safe yield. And I'm supposed to run a couple of concepts by you and see how you feel about them. They're very important concepts that are basically the primary issues that we'll then talk a little bit more about as we go through some of the other slides. We're committed to accomplishing safe yield in the Prescott Active Management Area. In fact, there's a state statute that says we'll accomplish that by 2025. The problem is that it's been difficult to do. And in fact, the fifth management plan that was just issued by DWR basically says we don't believe we're going to accomplish safe yield by 2025. And so a lot of that plan, as you read it, is looking for future things that the state might do to start another process that they hope will eventually get us to safe yield, perhaps with some new tools that would be given to the department. We, however, are still committed to safe yield. And this first concept is for the town to make a commitment that going forward, it will take a percentage of any new water resources that it might acquire and commit that percentage to the aquifer for the purpose solely of safe yield. Not for development, not for any other purpose, but for reaching safe yield. And the town would commit a percentage of that new water resource for that purpose. The percentage isn't spelled out. It would be determined by the science that we are still acquiring, and it would be based on our work with DWR to try to work with their programs, to work with their efforts, and get commitment from them that they would give us credit for the things that we would do in order to take care of the Prescott Valley impact on safe yield, whatever was everyone would agree was attributable to Prescott Valley. That's a new concept. That's a different concept. As you might recall, in the past, the town had thought about trying to grow out of the safe yield issue by getting new developers to bring the money and the resources for essentially taking the water that they would use and take the effluent from that and use that for safe yield. This is a different idea. This is saying basically we will now go forward and commit to reaching safe yield. The challenge with that, of course, is that we can't do that alone. We're a small jurisdiction relatively at 50,000. Even in PRAMA, even in the Prescott AMA, we can't reach safe yield by ourselves. We have to do that with our partners, with the other communities, and with other interest holders, such as the Salt River Project. And so the question is, how do you feel about making that commitment at this stage, as opposed to looking into the future as we have in the past?
Mr. Legler, I think it's time that Prescott Valley has recognized that this is something of serious in nature, and that the kicking the can down the road, what we've done in the past, is just irresponsible. So whether or not it happens next year, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, it has to start somewhere. And I think, although I speak on just myself from this dais, it's something that we as a council recognize as significant importance, and we all want to do what we can to preserve the most precious resource that we have. So I welcome basically the challenge of what we all have and what the team's been working on, and moving forward, I think it's a huge step for Prescott Valley.
I want to emphasize, as it says there, that we would be doing this based on scientific data, and we would be doing it in cooperation with the other communities. Obviously not something we would take on ourselves. But the concept we're indicating here we would accept and say we are pushing forward towards safe yield, regardless of some of the concerns out there statewide that we may not reach it.
One of the things, Mr. Legler, I think it's important, we welcome all the input from all of our partners, but at the end of the day, we don't decide for them. So in the event that another community may choose to go a different route or not agree to what we're trying to do, we're still confident that we're going to do the best that we can as a community to move forward. And that's all we can really do when you're trying to work with other partners in the region.
Thank you. Any
Councilwoman?
other thoughts?
My first question, are any of the AMAs in the state even close to reaching safe yield at this point? Do we know?
I don't know the question about close, but they're not at safe yield.
So basically with this fifth management plan, it's kind of the state going, it took them 40 years, but what they're realizing is that legislating something does not make it so. And what I like about this is that even if the legislation goes away or changes or whatever the state decides to do, we're still committed to that idea of safe yield. Safe yield is really a legislative term, but still the idea of trying to put the water, equal out the amount of water that we're using. Do we have numbers for what the overall overdraft is right now and what Prescott Valley's portion is?
There are numbers. Determining whether that's Prescott Valley's amount or somebody else's amount, I believe is still subject to some dispute. But DWR has online, it's a dashboard that you can go to, and they've got a pretty good number for the amount of overdraft.
Is that dashboard still not giving us credit for natural recharge? I know it wasn't when it first came out. Do we know?
That I don't know, but I don't believe it does.
Okay. Okay, so it's good. So then when that dashboard first came out, it was showing our overdraft at about 17,000 acre feet. And if you take into consideration natural recharge, I don't know why my microphone keeps doing that, then we are actually closer to 7,000 to 10,000 overdraft. So that's why I was just curious if we, when we start obviously getting more detailed in how we're doing this, just what numbers we would be going off of or trying to meet. But yeah, no, overall, it's a great idea.
And there are a number of things that may happen down the road. Right now we've got an agreement, we'll talk about that a little bit later, with WPI for effluent credits. And right now, those effluent credits are owned by WPI until 2032, but only a certain percentage of that has been used to date. The day may come where those may come back to the town. It'll be a challenge because we'll have to return some money if that happens. But those credits could perhaps be used in the future towards safe yield as well. A lot of things in the future to think about and work on. The next slide I want to get to is to talk about how you pay for it. And that's been one of the big challenges. That's the biggest challenge with everything related to water. Finding the money to do the things that need to be done. Again, developers can pay for water and use it for new growth. How are we going to perhaps use water that isn't being used for growth, that isn't part of the economic system where people are paying for something and we can use that money for that resource? And of course, that ends up being a taxing or fee-related issue for government generally. And one of the challenges we're going to have going forward is as we use new types of water resources, we first may have to charge people for water based on the source of their water. To date, most water is based on groundwater. The Jasper development is based on the effluent credits that were sold to WPI. In the future, if we were to say have water from the Big Chino, that would be paid for on a certain basis, and we might need to charge those who use that water a separate fee, a separate rate from those who are using groundwater. So that's the first concept we propose here. We may, like some communities, need to have a separate rate system where different parts of the community or different users would be paying different water rates based on the source of their water. That's one concept. The other is that to date, arguably no one has paid any fee towards recharging the aquifer for safe yield. And so looking into the future in terms of how we would pay to accomplish our efforts to reach safe yield, we may need to be thinking about a separate safe yield charge fee that would either be paid up front by a new developer or would be paid by current users who are in old developments and who would pay a surcharge each month on their water rates. Again, that's a very high-level discussion, but in order to reach safe yield, we're going to have a new funding source, different from anything that we've had to date. I'm sorry? I'm not running the slides.
Oh, okay.
That would explain it.
Okay.
Before you do that, I had a question on this slide, if that's okay.
Which one, the one before?
This one right here.
The one that hasn't moved yet.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, if that's okay. You ready?
I go for it.
Okay, because I know you're awesome if you're ready.
Uh,
I know we weren't crazy about the fifth management plan when it came out, but it's something we have to live with, right?
Right.
So comments on that? We're adjusting.
The fifth management plan, arguably, if you talk with DWR, they felt that they did the best they could with the resources that they've got, the tools that they've got. We had an opportunity to speak with the director, and the director has indicated that they still believe in safe yield, but they've been forced to a conclusion that says we just don't think we've got the tools to date that we need. And so for that reason, because for example, in our AMA, they didn't see the Big Chino project happening, and in past management plans, it simply said, we're going to reach safe yield and we're going to do it through the Big Chino project. Once they kind of said, we haven't seen that happen and we still don't know if it will, that was really our only hope for reaching safe yield by 2025. We're not going to get there now, but we still want to get there somehow, sometime. And so they would argue that the fifth management plan simply was a reality check.
And then two more questions or comments. When I saw this slide, my first question to Gilbert was, there's this big pond of groundwater. How do we know, how do we keep who keeps tabs? I know the state does, but who keeps tabs on how, since we're all in this AMA together, who keeps tabs if, like, we do a really good job on saving our water
Right.
and getting closer to safe yield, but the other communities, as this says, may not do such a good job. How does that all look?
You know, I'm not qualified to talk about that in terms of the technical things. If John were here, John Munderloh, he might be able to talk about that better than I. But one of the things we say there is that whatever we do, we will do in cooperation and conjunction with DWR and talking to them about getting the credits that we would need in order to feel comfortable that each community is carrying its burden, its share, as well as perhaps areas that are outside of the communities or in the county.
But for our residents that are watching, as this slide says, Prescott Valley does stand on its own with regard to the requirements of safe yield, and we will do our very best.
We'll
And
do our
it will
best.
be our priority to do this.
One thing to remember is that sometimes it's a temptation for a community to want to control its own destiny to the point that it just goes it alone. One of the things that is being proposed is that we go through the efforts, which are not always easy, to work with everyone else, work with the other interests, work with our partners, go through that process. It simply has to be done statewide and certainly in our AMA.
And then finally, and this might be for Mr. Morgan, but I always thought it was kind of wacky when they talked about safe yield just kind of being this fuzzy thing out there as a goal, and there were no requirements or anything to it. And now that it's going away, is there any rumblings down there about what might take its place?
Well, again, we've heard from the department that they don't think of it as going away, and they have been working towards it in their mind as they've, done each of the plans. It's been an iterative process. That's what they said in the 5th management plan. But they have acknowledged that we just aren't there, and if we're going to get there, we're going to have new methods, new concepts, new tools, new requirements. And they've indicated that there's a lot more to do, and they're ready to do it.
So just something to think about with and to Councilmember Hepperly's question as well, to the vice mayors. You've got multiple active management areas in the state. 2 of them have benefited directly from the importation of water from the Colorado River. So the federal government and the state of Arizona worked hand in hand to build, multi-billion-dollar canal system that is literally delivering millions of gallons of water to those 2 regions. In those 2 regions, you have areas wherever they are recharging from CAP water, you have a rising aquifer. So they're much closer to being able to achieve the goals set out with safe yield. Our challenge is we don't have that. And when CAP, the Central Arizona Project water, was being dispersed to different communities around the state, the city of Prescott did receive an allocation. There's no pipeline. There was never a plan to build a pipeline from the main Cap Canal up to Prescott. So that eventually got traded out through SRP, and that's how we ended up in partnership with the Big Chino. Our region does not have importation of water. We're at a severe disadvantage. So we're relying on, and to Councilmember Hepperly's point, we have to factor in natural recharge because there would be physically no way to achieve safe yield if you're not also combining in Mother Nature and what's being contributed. So until, and there's no way to conserve our way out of it. We're using more water. We have, uses than what you could possibly put back in. So that's why every drop of water that we can try to find from exterior to import in, and then certainly to manage through conservation and other measures, is going to be critical. But that's kind of a key difference is the other AMAs are benefiting from new water being imported into their regions. We do not have that. So that's where we're going to have to work with the state to come up with creative ways to try to solve this problem.
And I've taken more time on these 2 slides than I was allotted. So let me just ask you if you have any questions, any comments, any thoughts on these 2 slides.
I just want to make one quick comment for visualization purposes. You made me think of this. It is really easy to think of the aquifer as like a big lake in an underground cavern, and it's not. I mean, it's like minuscule water droplets in between granules of dirt. And so even if we were importing water or, capturing 50% of the natural recharge, the aquifer does not fill up like a bathtub. And a challenge that larger AMAs actually have is that they withdraw water from a place so far from where they recharge it that they'll still see levels dropping in their well fields, even though they're recharging the water elsewhere. So it's really important to think about the geological aspects of the aquifer.
Thank you. I'm going to pass this on to Neil. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Welcome, Mr. Wadenours.
Thank you. So as we're talking today, we're looking at all different things. We're looking at small things. We're looking at big things. We're trying to, leave no stone unturned. So, one of the areas that we started looking at was our bulk water sales. As many of you are aware, we have meters sitting on fire hydrants at different locations throughout town, and we sell water to water purveyors, to contractors, to whoever needs that water source at whatever location that might be close to where they're using it. But we don't regulate that as strictly as other areas do. Other areas only allow hydrants, meters used for construction and only for temporary construction purposes. We've got meters that have been out in our system for years and years, that somebody has been using for whatever reason. So we don't manage it as strictly as other areas. The reason that's important for us to look at that, so first of all, every year we're selling about 50 million gallons of water out of those meters. And that's through roughly somewhere between 80 and 100 different meters located throughout the town. The next slide, which you don't have to go to yet, but is a map that shows all of the hydrants that are in yellow are where we have meters located right now. And so the way that this would help us is, number one, hydrants can leak easier than other types of fittings when people are out there opening and closing them, whether it's a daily basis, a weekly basis, or whatever. It's something that we don't have control over. They open it and they close it. With living up here in this area, hydrants can freeze. And so all of the hydrants we have up here, they're called dry barrel hydrants, which means when you close the hydrant, which was full, may have 15 gallons of water in it, drains back into the ground. So every time you close a hydrant that's been opened, there's 15 gallons that is not accounted for. Okay, so depending on how often those hydrants are open, there's more water that we can lose there. And so we want to look at and explore at different options. One is putting a standpipe somewhere in town that people can go to directly, where we would take payment at that location and they could fill up a tank or a truck or whatever. That would be an option. Using some of our reclaimed water that we currently can't recharge because we don't have the facility. So requiring some people maybe to use reclaimed water instead of potable water would be another option. And so all we're looking at doing is trying to get better control of an area that we don't, we may not currently know everything that's going on with it, and managing it in a better way. So that's what this one is about.
Council, have you any questions for Mr. Wadsworth? Thank you, sir.
And this, you can see the graphic here. All the red are our hydrants, and the yellow are where we've got construction meters that are placed on those hydrants. So it's all throughout the whole community. All right, I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned this in the opening remarks, it's about managed growth. And again, this is, and I can't say this enough, we live in an incredible part of our state. Arizona is one of the fastest growing states in the country. We're going to continue to attract people. And, and I've said this in previous sessions, even if Prescott, the city of Prescott and the town of Prescott Valley said, well, we're not going to issue one more building permit, not one more commercial permit or building permit, growth will still happen. It's just going to go into the unincorporated areas all around us. And everyone that has large tracts of land, they're going to see dollar signs to start subdividing their property, and they're going to sell it off, and we will continue to have the growth. The challenge with that, or the consequence of that, is it's all unmanaged. You will not have the infrastructure issues. You will not have the central collection of wastewater systems. There's a huge consequence, and I can certainly go through multiple areas around our state where this has happened, and it creates huge consequences to the broader region with that. So recognizing that, and again, the council set out a very clear vision with the strategic plan, and it's also embedded in the town's general plan. And that's really calling out having managed smart growth and low impact development standards. So what this whole policy item, goal item is about is looking at the tools that we can eventually adopt in our land development code that really begins to address innovative ways to make sure that we are accommodating growth, but we're also doing it in a very smart, strategic way. A good example of this would be if you have a large development that's coming, wants to develop in Prescott Valley, and there's areas of that development that are really important to our community as open space, whether it is areas where antelope traverse through or other wildlife, a corridor that people, value. We may say to that developer, that is really important to the community. It's been identified as a conservation land in our community. We recognize you own it, but we're willing to transfer those density rights to another part of your property. You can have higher densities in other areas that are more appropriate for that development. So there's a lot of creative ways where you can have clustered development, have open space areas, and have it all tied together as an overall managed component. So again, taking elements from the 5th management plan, there's things in there that we can certainly incorporate, but there are, again, communities across Arizona that we can extract some of their incentive-based smart growth policies. And these aren't just hardline regulations. You can create things where it's an incentive to the private sector, to the developer, where if they choose certain things that add value from a conservation perspective, they get points. Those points can then translate into certain density rights or other development rights that they may have. So we can get very creative about this to make sure it's not a punitive thing. In some cases, there may need to be a regulation, but in others, you can certainly do it from an incentive-based perspective. And I just, wanted to, with smart growth in particular, it's really about looking at the economy, opportunities for diverse housing types. The council and the vice mayor have been working on, housing strategies. This ties right into that, making sure we have a diverse array of housing and not just, one, uniform approach to how we make sure we house people for the future. So that's really what that's getting at. With that, I'll open it if there's any questions on this particular item.
Council, any questions for Mr. Davidson?
I just have a comment.
Okay.
I want to thank you so much for explaining everything so well. I understand everything that you say in a really clear manner, and I hope that the community understands this concept as well, because it's great to look at things from this perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Wadsworth.
All right, so the next thing is to look at water conservation and retrofits and practices. And there's 2 ideas on this slide. One of them is things that we can do within our own government facilities. And so that would include retrofitting things like the flush valves on toilets, things along those lines. Could include practices of irrigation at the parks and making sure that we're using, the best possible practices there, whether it's computer technology, whether it's more efficient sprinkler systems or whatever. So kind of drilling down on our own facilities to make sure that we're doing the best that we can. Included in that category are a couple, one of the things that we've already started doing is looking at our storm drainage throughout town. We've already got a firm on board that's looking at a stormwater master plan. And one of the options things that they're looking at is how do they incorporate ways to, rather than conveying the water away as fast as you can, how do you get more of it to soak in the ground? So it's not recharge that we get credit for, but it does recharge the aquifer and ultimately, will result in higher or more stable groundwater level. So ways to enhance that. And then the other half of this would be looking at more policies and regulations that relate to our rates, how we implement those, rebates, incentives, and other regulations. So some examples would be like requiring hot water recirculation pumps on all new homes. And then on the other side of that, maybe offering rebates to people who don't have them, that if they put them in, they could, get some money for that. So that would be something that would fit in there. Encouraging xeriscaping, rainwater collection systems, and, discussing whether or not there would be incentives associated with things like that. So it's drilling down to more of the, more of the technical way of doing things.
Thank you, sir.
Historically, Prescott Valley has been dependent on groundwater. It started as a community that had a private water company providing water. Eventually, it bought that water company, but the water resource was still groundwater. And it was based on state law. The state law allowed for groundwater to be used by new development. Then in 1998, the Department of Water Resources declared the entire active management area to be in a state of not safe yield. I'm trying to remember what the term was. Anyway, mining, groundwater mining, and basically said you can't use groundwater for any new development. And so any new developers were going to have to go out and find other water resources in order to grow. The challenge, of course, is that there aren't that many other water resources out there. And so the town went to DWR and said, okay, what if we take these facilities that we've been developing over time to recharge groundwater back into the ground? Can that be used in the future for new growth? And the answer was yes. And so those effluent credits were recognized by DWR, and they are now the only additional water source that is really readily available to anyone today who wants to develop inside Prescott Valley, unless they go buy some Type 2 rights or some other right that is still out there. So we're dependent on the ability of folks to be able to go get those water resources and then go to DWR and go through a 6, 7, 8, 9-month process to get a certificate of assured water supply. One of the things that we would like to do is to become a designated water provider like our neighbor, the city of Prescott. They're able to do that because they, in their own right, have water resources. They have surface rights. They have other rights that they developed years ago. They've been a community much longer than we have. And so they are able to take those rights and combine them, and DWR recognizes that. And then instead of developers going to the Department of Water Resources for a CAWS, the city actually administers it under the DWR rules and agrees that a certain amount of water can be used for new development. We'd like to have that same role. The challenge we'll have is explaining to DWR what is our water source. And one of the sources that we would like to point to is the water that we could receive from the Big Chino Water Project, because we are a partner in that project and we receive 46% of that water. And so we have talked with DWR about becoming a designated provider based on that source, as well as perhaps someday our effluent credits, if those are held again by the town. In the meantime, of course, we've got this challenge that the entire state has. Developments that are coming in that are not technically subdivisions. They're offered for rent, and because they're offered for rent, they're actually considered commercial, and they don't have to receive a CAWS. If we were a designated provider, we could work with them and we would use our water, and that water would be designated for those new developments. But in the CAWS context, they can simply come in, period, without having to get a certificate of assured water supply. And that's true all over the state. We are proposing, in order to make sure that we are managing our water resources effectively and reaching toward that safe yield goal that we've talked about, telling these new developers, the folks who come in and talk to us about apartments, the folks who come to us and talk about these new concepts where they rent for less than a year, you're going to need to go get a water source in order to come into our community. And the basis for that will be to say that you've been using a portion of the groundwater that was left over at the time of declaration in 1998, 1999, to be able to come into our community. The groundwater that was given to Granville, the groundwater that was given to Stone Ridge, the groundwater that was given to Pronghorn Ranch, it had an amount that was considered usable for commercial, for governmental, for industrial. And we've been kind of keeping track of that, and we've been allowing you to come in based on that use of groundwater. But from our point of view today, that's gone. That amount is done. What we've had in the past has used that up. And so we're going to be letting these new developers know that they're not going to be able to come into Prescott Valley unless they go get another water resource. That'll be something that we'll adopt by ordinance, and that we're currently indicating to developers that we are going to enforce now. Any thoughts about that? We may have some pushback, but we believe that that's the only reasonable course that we can take.
Councilwoman?
So this applies to everybody within town. What about county? So it doesn't apply to anybody within the,
Right, obviously, the town wouldn't be able to control what was in the county.
So I don't know if I heard you right, Ivan, but are you saying that the developers, those were residential developers?
Correct.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I thought you meant commercial and industrial.
No, and in fact, I want to make it clear that as we've kept track of the water that we got back in 1998, 1999, we believe that there is still water that we can apply to true commercial development. But it's the development that is using it as residential, although it's technically commercial, that we need to regulate.
Councilwoman?
I just want to sum up to make sure that we're kind of clear on just everything that you just said. So the town would like to become a designated provider, which would allow the CAWS process to be maybe quicker, but not any easier. I want to clarify that they would still have to go through the same rules, regs, procedures that they are currently now with the state, correct?
Correct.
So becoming a designated provider is not like some kind of shortcut that Prescott Valley is trying to take so that they can get certificates to builders
The only
quicker.
shortcut involved would be time.
Right. But then on the other hand, it gives Prescott Valley more control over these apartment complexes, things like that, who don't currently have to get certificate of assured water supply, but right now can kind of just go unchecked.
And what I've indicated is that we would like to go ahead and apply something now, even if we're not a designated provider, if we're still a certificate of assured water supply community, we will, under our own code, apply this process that I've shared with you, where we would indicate to those types of developments, you do have to go out and get new water. Multifamily. Mhm.
Councilwoman?
This is to be applied to existing situations, apartments, and I was curious, does that include like Mulberry Farms that only lease, they don't sell, and these mini homes?
The folks that are already here have used that water that I described. And the point is that that water's gone. So this would then apply to new developments that come in.
Because like at Mulberry Farms, only a portion of their homes have been built. So, and they're
They've
doing it
received
in
their approvals, and so they would not, this would not apply to them.
phases. Okay.
Else for Mr. Legler?
Thank you.
Sorry, Ivan, sorry. So what do we have to, Ivan? What do we have to do? It sounds like this is something you want to do now to multifamily. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. And it's not just multifamily, it is residential that is not a subdivision. So it would include apartments, and it would also include duplexes, triplexes, but also some single-family facilities that are being proposed that are rentals.
So what do we have to do to our code or whatever by resolution or ordinance to start making this happen?
It would be
Or
by
in that
ordinance.
Direction.
It would be by ordinance.
Is that
And
something
we
you're
would be
already?
bringing those ordinances to you as part of the implementation of these goals that we're discussing
Got it.
today.
All right, now we're good, sir.
Okay, am I next? Okay. I got ahead of myself there. So we're starting to talk about new water resources. And the first water resource that we need to talk about, I mentioned earlier, is implementing our agreement with WPI. You'll recall that back in 2007, the Department of Water Resources had recognized a certain amount of water that the town of Prescott Valley could recharge as a new water resource. And that amount was 2,724 acre feet. And so that was auctioned in 2007. However, the amount that we could actually deliver, that we were actually putting in the ground, was only 1,103. And so that was what was actually purchased by the successful bidder. And they paid $24,650 for each acre foot. That came to a little more than 27 million. They paid us a down payment of 25%. And so that came to a little less than $7 million. The agreement that was entered into was that we would continue to develop new recharge facilities that would allow more water to go into the ground. They would then be able to pay us another 25% for those additional amounts. And that additional amount so far that we have sold to them is 380.5 acre feet. So today, the amount of acre feet that the WPI folks could sell to a third-party developer is 1,483.5 acre feet out of that original 2,724. To date, they have turned around and sold to third parties 349 acre feet. And so today, there is still 1,100 acre feet that they could sell to third parties. The agreement ran until 2032. For a long time, none of it got used, largely because of the Great Recession that hit in 2008. And so we didn't have the first agreement until 2018, that we finally resold some of those effluent credits. So the goal that is being proposed here is to continue to encourage that water resource, to encourage third parties to purchase and use those effluent credits, and to continue to develop the recharge facilities that need to be developed in order for those resources to be sold. The challenge we're going to face is that when the agreement ends in 2032, if some of that hasn't been sold to a third party, we're going to have to pay back that 25% down payment. We won't have to pay interest on it, but we'll have to pay it back. Now, the flip side of that is that we'll get those effluent credits back, but we'll have to return that money, and today that would be roughly $7 million. So that's our challenge. We're needing to make that work. We want to especially make sure that that resource is available for people to develop. It's the only ready resource that is available inside our community today. If we are going to do many different things in our community, that is the resource that will be most available. particularly for apartments, particularly for these new rental residence units that are coming in. And so we're proposing to make sure that that continues to be an effective agreement. I will indicate to you that the day may come where we may want to sit down and think about possibly renewing the agreement. If we did so, we would do it in discussions where we said, okay, let's come up with some new concepts. We won't pay you back, but we might start thinking about ways we could use that effluent for other purposes, including for safe yield. And of course, then we would have to come up with the revenue sources to do that. Any questions of me for that?
So Ivan, applying for grants in the county areas where we deliver water to put in sewer to get the effluent back will help us with this, right?
Yes, grants that help us to recharge more water, yes. And of course, one of the things we've got to do is make sure that as we recharge, we don't put PFAS into the ground or some of the other contaminants that are out there. And that's one of the ongoing things that Neil is dealing with when we get these grants. Not only is that being used to build the facilities, but now we've got to make sure that we've got these treatment aspects of it as well. Very expensive. That's why we're looking for that money.
So I don't know if that was a future slide, but I know Gilbert mentioned it, applying for grants in like the country club and the county area.
Gilbert says he's going to cover that in the next slide.
Sorry.
Any other questions? Thank you.
He was wrong. It's not the next slide and he's not covering it. We'll get, yeah, that's towards the end here. So the next one, this is more of a recap, things that we're continuing to do. And this is related to the Big Chino project. As you're aware, we have an agreement with City of Prescott and SRP. It's called the Comprehensive Agreement Number 1. We are still working with those two entities as part of that agreement. And what that agreement says is that we will monitor the Big Chino aquifer. We'll model it, and the pumping from it will be modeled, and then we will mitigate. And so the comprehensive agreement number 1 covers both of those items. We've already done all the monitoring. We're still in the middle of the modeling portion of that. And as of right now, we're probably still 18 months away from having the computer models done. Once they're done, we can then start looking at different scenarios and what that means in terms of mitigation and what that'll do. That'll ultimately result in us entering into a comprehensive agreement number 2 with the other two parties, and continue to protect our resource in that area. And then one of the other things that will end up being part of all that will be looking at land conservation up in that area. Obviously, that area up there is susceptible to development. It's a very nice area. It's got water. And so without some additional protections, we don't know what's going to happen up there. So protecting that will be something we will be looking at as well.
Okay, building on what Mr. Wadsworth just talked about. So Big Chino has been a focus for our whole region for a number of years. But what this policy goal is speaking to is we need to be looking for water everywhere. I've joked about this, but if we can get water from the moon and get it imported, we have to be willing to throw the spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, and explore new creative partnerships and relationships. And so this whole thing is about that effort. The town has worked very hard in this regard. We've been able to obtain what are called type 2 water rights, so grandfathered water rights that run with some of the land properties in the region. We just recently purchased one that's helpful. It's a small amount of water, but all of those small amounts add up to larger amounts of water. So there are not many opportunities for type 2 water rights that come out on the market to be able to purchase. So when we do get one, it's that we want to certainly hope that we have the money in the bank to be able to purchase these, because these are very valuable. Where we really want to spend some of our time is, again, those creative partnerships. And I cannot stress enough the importance of those partnerships around the state. This is why, Mr. Moore is a key part of our strategy. I'll give you an example of where this is paying off for a community down in the valley. The Salt River Project is a quasi-municipal entity, and it provides both water and electric service within its jurisdiction. Historically, it predates the state of Arizona. SRP traditionally has only focused on, its communities that it serves. Up until recently, they've now started to partner with communities that are not in their service area. And a good example is Goodyear. Goodyear and SRP are entering into an agreement, or have entered into an agreement, where Goodyear is helping to pay for the portion of raising a dam so that there's more water capacity in the SRP system, and Goodyear gets some of that water. So those are the creative things that we want to be looking at. And if we can buy water somewhere else and be able to trade that, with other entities, we just want to always be nimble and looking for, those key water resources. It goes back to what, Mr. Legler's talked about this multiple times. We also have to make sure we've got the revenue streams to be able to do those things. But this is where complementing the Big Chino water, and that is a long process. We still have a long ways before that water could be used. We need to be looking for any other creative partnership where we can trade off water and make sure that we're able to, deliver to our residents. Another challenge that we'll have that's mentioned in this, it's called the Gila River adjudication. This has been going on for decades, and it's basically looking at the impacts across the entire Gila River shed, which is a huge, river running through Arizona, and all the tributaries to the Gila River. Wherever there's been groundwater pumping, that could impact downstream water rights. And so there has literally been many judges for years going through mind-numbing, analysis of different wells and how it impacts the subflows of the overall Gila system. So as court rulings come out in the years ahead, that could have an impact on some of our wells. So we also have to be prepared for that, where the court could rule that certain wells in our community have contributed to something downstream. We would have to make up that water from somewhere else. So again, this is really important that we're looking for every partnership that we possibly can. Any questions on this one? Okay, and our last slide. Oh, we already had it.
You heard that correct? Last slide.
The closer, huh?
Maybe. Okay, so this last one, this is related to what Councilperson Hunt brought up a little bit earlier. Traditionally, it has been our policy that we do not provide sewer service outside of the town of Prescott Valley. They need to annex into the town, and then we would provide that service to them. And so we're exploring the option of, do we change that policy? Do we allow, do we provide sewer service to Castle Canyon Mesa and to the Prescott Country Club without them being required to annex into the town? So the benefits to that would be that it increases the effluent supply that we would have for recharge. We can recharge it more efficiently. Septic is not a good way to recharge. It would also move the sources of the septic tanks. If we were to capture that water and took it to our treatment plant, we'd provide better treatment, but it moves that water away from our well fields. So if we're treating it or if they're not treating it now, we don't know what's happening, what's going into the ground. So that would be a benefit as well. There are some challenges. So this isn't just a, we do it and we're done. Obviously, the cost of these very expensive. This isn't something that could be borne by our current ratepayers. It would have to be paid for by the people we're bringing in, by grants, other funding sources and those sorts of things. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is currently we don't have sufficient recharge facilities to get all of our own water into the ground. So now we have more. So that means more expanding the treatment plant at some point in the future, continuing to expand our recharge facilities, and including that component of better treatment for emerging contaminants and PFAS. So those would be some of the challenges that we would be facing. And so with that, I will close out. I don't know if Gilbert has any closing comments, but if you have any questions for me.
Any questions, council?
Reference the current wastewater plant that we have. Are there provisions or is there discussion about the fact that this plant that is currently servicing the 50,000 that we have, when we grow to 75,000, this plant will obviously have to be expanded. Is there property enough for that? Did people have foresight, to look at provisions in the future to service that? I know I was in the Tucson wastewater management plant. Actually, I think it's in Moran, right on the border there. And and it's, to me, it appears to be so much bigger than what we have here. And and I can only foresee that if we don't make provisions for expanding this wastewater management plant, that we're going to run into some huge problems in the future. So what do you have to say about all that?
Well, so there was a lot of different questions in there. I guess in summary, our plant has the capacity to provide treatment to 3.75 million gallons per day. With our current population, we are treating 2.6. So we still roughly have about, what do you call it, a third of the capacity that we can expand. So a third more population that we can treat hydraulically wise. So you got to look at hydraulics and you got to look at solids loading at the plant, two different questions. But hydraulically, we're good for quite a while still. We do have additional space around the plant for expanding the facilities when we need to. In addition, some treatment processes have become a lot more efficient over time, and there are processes that can treat more volume of waste in smaller areas, and so we can do something like that to utilize the existing footprint better. So all of those things, but yes, we will be able to match our treatment needs as the community grows.
Councilwoman?
I do have one more question on the reasons why the people that are necessarily in Prescott Country Club or in the Castle Canyon Mesa area. I know they're not wanting to annex on some of the county areas because they like the county rules and regulations, correct? But at some point, those older septic systems are going to fail over time, and then mound systems would then be required. Not necessarily are they cost effective. So it would be a good idea for us to annex them in order to provide the services. Is there other reasons than that they would not want annexed?
Well, I think not wanting to be annexed is, everybody's probably got their own opinion as to why they do or don't want to be annexed. We have different regulations related to code enforcement. A lot of times the people who move to the county don't want the level of oversight that they feel they might get or, come under scrutiny of if they're incorporated into the town of Prescott Valley. So those are all, reasons as to why they may not want to. I think sewer service is a reason they may want to, because as you mentioned, those septic tanks are getting older. We know of a number of them that are failing, and people have to go back out and rebuild them. And oftentimes they can't rebuild them to the current standards that are in place now. And so there's a good incentive for them to tie onto our system. And if we can make it more palatable for them to do that without requiring them to annex, that comes with all those extra bells and whistles maybe, then maybe they'd be more willing to participate in something like that.
Thank you very much.
Anything else, council?
Mayor, members of the council, if there's not any other questions, we appreciate your time and interest in this. And again, this is, by the action that you set forth with the council's strategic plan and our general plan are what's driving, all of these initiatives. So we thank you for the leadership to really kind of force us to start thinking about some of these things and to innovate through some of these very challenging issues. As you know, we've got a number of parallel issues going on here. So not only what we talked about tonight, but we've had previous sessions where we have a full rate study that is ongoing that ties into this. We have a master drainage plan and recharge plan that is currently going on. So all of these things together, are going to be part of the overall water management effort. So with that, are there any other questions that you may have?
When will we see you back in front of council on this topic?
Mr. Mayor, most likely what you'll see going forward will be one-offs. So we'll be working on specific policies that are ready to go forward, whether as a resolution or an ordinance, depending on what the item is. So I would say over the next number of months, next year, there'll be things that will start to roll out.
Great. Davison? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That being said, thanks for coming out, everyone.